Hello everyone from Neum in Bosnia and Herzegovina and welcome to this edition of the EU Mentorship podcast, Stories from the Balkans. Together with me we have Nevena Lujinović from the Free Citizens Movement in Serbia. She's one of our participants this year in the EU Mentorship program. And we have Luka Nikolić, who is the International Officer of the Liberal Party of Montenegro, who is also one of the participants. And we are going to have a conversation in the light of the current geopolitical context that both Europe is facing as well as the rest of the world. So we're going to discuss a bit the situations in Montenegro and Serbia, obviously focusing on the unfortunate events that followed the aggression on Ukraine, as well as the upcoming reports by the European Commission in terms of the progress your countries are or aren't making when it comes to the accession process and what can be done differently, what can be helpful for you to make this process more credible, more achievable, and to move the value-based approach to the citizens, move closer to the citizens. So thank you again for joining us here in this beautiful sunny day to talk about geopolitics. It's the best day we could have for geopolitics because the sunshine is here and hopefully it also can indicate a ray of hope for the integration process. So let's start with what everybody calls the elephant in the room when it comes to the enlargement group, and that is the Serbian case. We know that there are some difficulties in aligning certain policies, mostly foreign policies, in Serbia with those of the European Union, and there's a stalemate in the integration process of Serbia. Although everybody can agree on that this is a very strategically important country for a lot of geopolitical players, and the EU especially, because if you get Serbia on board with the process, a lot of the other countries will follow. So obviously it's a strategic interest to get in line. So now, following the aggression in Ukraine, how is the sentiment in Serbia towards the European Union and towards the Russia in comparison? I know there has been some changes, not in a very good direction, obviously, in terms of the public opinion polls and the sentiments towards enlargement. Is it credible in Serbia? Is it possible in Serbia? Or is it really just a stalemate that cannot be fixed?
Well, yeah, actually we still hope that things can be fixed, but currently it's not very positive, because the things are not very positive from our point of view, from PSG points of view, since like 82% of citizens declare themselves as against imposing any kinds of sanctions towards Russia in this situation when we have a war in Ukraine. So yeah, that's like a sentiment that also leads to this sentiment, like a kind of Euroscepticism that's now present, because it's interesting that people believe if you are pro-Russian, then you should be against EU, which is not like almost the case, because also our government will have to decide very soon, like if they will impose sanctions or not, and then of course the EU wants us to do that, and the pro-Russian parties are strongly like against it, and majority of Serbian citizens. And that's why it's difficult for any government that will be formed, since we had elections in April and still we didn't get a government because the parliament wasn't established yet, and it will be difficult to make this decision and to make a turn toward EU in a full manner, like saying, okay, we will impose sanctions and we are following our EU integrations path, because that's what population said that they don't want, actually. So, but we hope that that the ruling party SNS will just still decide to do that and to.
I know that this year or in the last months there has been a historical change in opinion. Obviously the kind of support for the accession in the EU has been the lowest in Serbia in the region, but it was still on a good percentage of support. But this year, following the aggression on Ukraine, it has actually fallen below 50%, which should be alarming for the EU.
Yeah, it is.
And the EU should be able to know how to react to this. So, do you feel like this is also not only due to the aggression of Russia, but also because the process has not shown any concrete results, because it seems like most EU citizens and EU member states are against enlargement in general, and then the process just became not credible anymore, it's not any more credible, and that the people just feel like it's a waste of time and supporting that. Do you think this also contributed to this general sentiment?
Yeah, definitely this contributed to, because even before this situation in Ukraine, there were still many people who were saying exactly this, that we're just like not, that we are not wanted from the EU side, so that anything we do is not good enough, or like they will always find something, if currently they don't want you to join, that there will always be something which you didn't fulfill. But of course, I think that from our side we have to do whatever is required, and then we can say that they didn't want us. But there is a lack of actually this kind of there is a lack of really like concrete steps that the government has been taking over the last, I don't know, like 20 years. So we cannot just say that EU doesn't want us, because they would want us if we would fix some things that they ask from us. So yeah, but of course any kind of support is welcome. Like since we are now facing with this Euroscepticism, we would like to see more, maybe some kind of awareness raising campaigns that can be spread all over the country in order to just open people's eyes. And all these people who are saying that they are not for Serbia joining EU, they actually want to, they see themselves, they see their kids getting education in countries of European Union. They want to travel there, they want maybe to go and work there, so they want to have economic relations with these countries. Not with Russia, but they're just, it's a kind of a sentiment that's deeply rooted, and we just need to change that.
So basically there's a sentiment that's also deeply pro-European as well as pro-Russian, but this pro-European part is not being monetized by the European Union, because sometimes the process is highly bureaucratic and it's not about actual transformation and emotions of citizens. And on that note, we go to Montenegro, who has been the front runner in the process when it comes to the Western Balkans, but also experienced a lot of stalemate. How credible is the process when you've opened all the chapters, closed 3, haven't closed any in a while, but also see other countries like North Macedonia and Albania not being able to start the process of negotiations due to certain failures from the EU side? How does that send, what kind of message does that send to citizens of Montenegro? Because I remember, only like 3 years ago when we started the EU mentorship program, it was always like, oh, the accession is stopping, but if they ever open it, even for a second, Montenegro is in. And everybody thought Montenegro is in, and then it stopped. First you got your crisis that you went through, a political one, and now, how is the sentiment for the people?
So 80% of the answer is in your question, in fact. If you consider public opinion polls, you still have almost 80% of people for the EU. But what public opinion polls cannot measure is the actual enthusiasm for the process. Because we encountered so-called enlargement fatigue. Because as you said as well, for a long time we haven't, not for long, relatively long time, we haven't closed any chapter. So basically, the European integration needs to be a two-way process. So we make certain reforms and we get feedback for those reforms. Now we need to question both poles on that side. On our side, we need to consider whether those reforms were real. And if we were making essential efforts, especially in those problematic, those legendary chapters 23 and 24, judiciary reforms and systemic corruption, we need to see whether we did that just for the sake of showing up, boasting about our reforms, or we really felt the need to do so. And on the other side, traditionally passive EU policies disenchanted people from the very process. And that aggravated, the Brussels bureaucracy aggravated our feeling of being marginal, of being second tier. And we don't need to be so. And we don't want to be so, but we understand also their side and their opinion, because if you are doing reform and if you have the tempo of reforms as we had, and that is just occasional reform, occasional some kind of improvement of our legislation and so on, then you cannot expect more than you have. And that is not big.
Interesting point that you made. When you feel like the achievements that Montenegro has made are a lot in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of legislation, but from the outside, like from when I visit Montenegro and the processes, well, they have not been deeply transformative, but there has been a transformation in society. So, do you think that the EU actually is aware of its effect, or does it only focus on bureaucracy? For example, whenever I visit Zagreb every year, since the Croatia joined, I can actually see a transformation in the societies, as well as with Sofia in Bulgaria. Like there is an EU effect of membership, but for me it feels like the EU focuses a lot more on the negatives than what actually achieves in terms of the mindset and in terms of like getting people on board to be on their team. So do you feel like is this like I say it, or do you feel like it should be the benchmarks are the main, the bureaucratical achievements are the main thing we should achieve, the current process that we are measuring progress is good, or there should be a more abstract approach towards, a more geopolitical approach towards actually evaluating your societal transformation? Because I know there's a long way to go for the region, not just for Montenegro in terms of certain things, but there's been a transformation, there's been progress.
Yes, for sure, we can talk volumes about criteria and about how they are clear, concise, those Copenhagen criteria, and whether it is fair to have much more criteria than some countries in the past, waves of enlargement, and so on. But on the other side, we are being criticized for not handling very well quotidian political events, deep socio-political divides, that problem with pro-Russian sentiment, with pro-clerical sentiment that we have in the society. But then we are being criticized because of that, but we are expected to improve our legislation, for example. And it's not compatible, because expectations from us are very high. And we don't have enough incentive as a feedback to continue doing so. Because if you accuse us of not being able to handle manifest appearances of that, then how can you expect us to dive deeper into the essence? And I think that we should, because changing the basis, the foundation, that is obviously somehow the spot where we should start and build upon that kind of manifest problems that we have. So basically we need to change the foundation, and not just bureaucracy and legislation, because that's not the most important thing. It's just the consequence. It's just the consequence of process of transforming, let's say, comprehensive transformation of socio-political environment. And that's the question of mentality, and it takes time.
Yeah, I agree completely with you. And I think it's really, I would love to see an analysis of how the perspective, at the point where it was credible, has created progress in our societies, and then compare it to the backsliding that has happened when enlargement fatigue kind of stepped into the picture. But just going back to Serbia for a while, and we have the aggression in Ukraine going on right now. We have certain shifts in the Serbian politics. We have some right-wing opposition parties, or even more right-wing than Vučić, coming to the scene. And then we have you as a force that is pro-European, pro-Western. How do you plan to kind of fight this wave of nationalism? Is it hard to be screaming EU values, European values, progressive values constantly at the citizens without getting the feedback that you would want and even a lack of platform to do so, because I know that for you, social media is sometimes the best platform because of the media freedom that is a lot shrinking, the space is shrinking for such values to be heard in the public media. So how do you feel, what is the best way forward for a party like yours that's inclusive and open-minded and welcoming to everybody who has certain values to follow?
Yeah, well, as you said, yeah, the situation is difficult, and but it has been difficult for liberals in Serbia since the day one. So we cannot we don't want to complain. We just don't want to change our narrative at any cost. You know, we just hope that. That of course it will take time, but our aim is just to take power in one moment, not alone, of course, but with some other pro-European and progressive parties. And then, I mean, because it's, you know, sometimes it's also when you're in power, you can more easily manipulate the how to say, the voters, because not to tell lies to them or something, but then you can impose your own narrative,
counter narrative.
Yeah, because we had that, you know, during the rule of Democratic Party 10 years ago, where actually, you know, like a majority of the population was actually pro-European, because that's what they were listening to, and that was. For them, that seemed to be the good thing, to be pro-European. So now we have this, you know, regime for the last 10 years that says officially that it's pro-European, but it actually has like contradictory statements with regards to it. You know, usually you can hear our president fighting with EU officials. He's fighting with them on national TV. He doesn't fight with them in person. But on national TV, he would start criticizing them and saying they ask us to do this, they ask us to do that, but we tell them no, and something like this, you know. So he's actually encouraging this kind of this population that's easy to be manipulated, and that they're, you know, they're, how to say, they can easily change their minds if they hear from him something bad about EU, they will be against it, and other way around. So, yeah, we think that I mean, just taking over the power would solve this issue of are people in Serbia actually wanting to join EU or not, and it's now the responsibility lies on the current regime, and. Yeah, even if they, in the end, say, okay, we will impose sanctions on Russia and so on, we still need to see what will their rhetoric be, you know, if they will really go 100% for it, or they will still, you know, like try to sit on two chairs.
I must say I really appreciate the ambition, the pragmaticism, and the political ambition and pragmaticism that you are taking into account, as well as responsibility and accountability as politicians have into changing and shifting a certain narrative in your country. It's very admirable, and I hope you get the support that you need. But talking about support, we have a whole liberal network that you are part of. We have a certain access to maybe even EU decision makers, and to spread the message how enlargement is important, and this is what this project is about. And with the assistance of the European Liberal Forum, we can achieve a lot of things. But if you could say just one thing that you would need from this European support network that could help advance your ambitions, your political ambitions, and the ambition of spreading EU values in Serbia, what would be helpful for you?
Well, the main thing that would be helpful is maybe for EU not to show support to our current president and his ruling party, because they, at the end of the day, they have he has their support, and maybe that would be the main thing for us that could be done. But of course, maybe it's not in the best interest of EU to do that so drastically now. So what else? Yeah, as I mentioned, some kind of awareness raising campaigns. Yeah, just to see us as the best partners. I mean, when I say us, not only our party, but like this, like a real progressive part of.
If I may jump in here.
Yes, I wanted to ask you actually the same question.
The one thing that we would really like to get is one thing that they cannot give to us, and that is the date of accession. And that's why we are very grateful to people who even try to provide the date. Because, for example, Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis, he said 2033.
Yeah.
But recently, now the Congress in Dublin, they were so much more generous, and they said 2028. 2029. Yeah. And that it sounds distant, but that's very good and that's very encouraging, and we are being grateful to that political process which is taking place within ALDE. So
yeah, talking about dates, there's one date that you've overlooked in this resolution that was adopted at the ALDE Congress regarding the enlargement, and that is the next European elections. We were actually asked to have countries participate in the elections and to have directly elected observer MEPs from the Western Balkans in the European Parliament, which sometimes it has been shown in different EU member states that the liberal parties tend to do better actually in EU elections than in their national ones, because people feel like, okay, yeah, these are the people that we want to send to the table to talk to EU officials, and not this one. This is more for us, you know. So do you feel that this is encouraging, for example, for your party, if it would happen naturally?
For sure, of course. It would be a huge incentive to be involved in decision-making processes on the European level, although, I mean, without right to vote, but still, being present there, being at the table, being located at the table with all the, let's say, on European level, great powers, it would be, of course, such a huge incentive for us.
Yes, and just to wrap up as a last message on this positive note, of this vision of Western Balkan MEPs being at the same table and discussing European issues and European values and European policies together with EU policymakers. I'm going to ask you both to imagine what your party's MEP would actually, the first thing and first initiative or first policy that would implemented in the European Parliament or table as a resolution or something that would actually help your country move towards the EU. What would that be? So anyone who wants to go first, go.
Can I start?
Yes.
So, for our first MEP would first of all, his first statement there would be that despite we know certain deficiencies in the process, both of accession and within the EU, we are definitely pro-European and we are Euro-optimists. But unfortunately, this kind of process, if it still is stalemate, if it will be stalemate, it will become mutually hurting stalemate, both for EU and Montenegro on this side. And it will unfortunately open space for third or fourth parties to enter the process. And that is what Mr. Emil Kerias would say, we need to turn it into a fortunate one.
We would like the whole Serbia to really see us as like not sitting on two chairs and not even citizens to have this pro-Russian sentiment, but to see us as really like a pro-Western, pro-European country that's really like determined on its way of full EU integration.
So a different Serbia voice on the European Parliament.
Definitely.
Okay, that was an interesting conversation to have, and thank you all for paying attention, for listening. Thank you for the amazing conversation that we have. We have shown how important it is to have Western Balkan voices at the table talking about the process that affects them most and not just affects the EU itself. So it's not only EU enlargement, it's accession of the Western Balkan states to the EU. So it's a two-way street, and therefore we need to table the discussion on both the EU side and the Western Balkan side, and we hope to do so in the future with the EU Mentorship program. And thank you to the European Liberal Forum for making it possible, for creating this platform where we can talk about the future of the EU together. Thank you again for the opportunity, and see you at the next podcast.